Consider this. What if your doctor told you that you had just 1 month to live? How would you live? Would you go bungee jumping or skydiving like you've always wanted to? Or maybe go buy that pickup truck you've been having your eye on for some time. Just didn't feel like it was not too much, or felt it was too much. Or you want to take that long way trip to Hawaii or the Caribbean. Or in my case, it would be to finally buy that 58 Chevy Impala with fender skirts and chrome flames coming out the side. Whatever dreams have gone unfulfilled, you would probably try harder than ever to fulfill them during those 30 days. But how many of you would rush out and pull together all the people that are important to you and wash their feet? Well, that's what Jesus did. During the night before he was crucified, he was gathered with his disciples to celebrate the Passover feast, and which was a traditional time, incidentally, for the Jews to come together to remember how God delivered them from Egypt and to remember that he is always with them. It's an exciting time in Jerusalem, festive time also, lots of people around. But as Jesus shares the Passover meal with his disciples, he knows the shadow of the cross is darker than it ever has been. And with all the preparations made for the meal, someone, and then everybody coming together, someone did not notice that there was not a servant there or someone in the family where they had borrowed the house wasn't there to wash their feet. This was a common custom to do in a very dusty land where you only perhaps wore sandals, if anything. So you can understand their surprise then when Jesus rose from where he was reclining to share the Passover feast, took off his outer garments, and took a basin and a pitcher of water, and began to wash the disciples' feet, one by one. Just imagine the shock on their faces, and what they must have been thinking as it took, I would say, quite a bit of time to wash 24 feet, and the silence that filled the room. We know how one of those disciples reacted. John tells us in his gospel how Peter reacted in John chapter 13, beginning verse 6. I'm going to read that, or you can follow along with me if you have your Bibles. Jesus came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not everyone is clean." When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Notice what Jesus said as to why he performed this task of a lowly servant. He said, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." And was he talking about just washing feet, or was he talking about more than that? We've been looking and focusing our attention the past 2 Sundays on the stated mission of Calvin First Christian Church. And it was on a slide even prior to the service. The Calvin Christian Church exists to proclaim his message, to equip the believers, to encourage everyone to become more like Christ in our service to him. And today we want to unfold that third phrase of the mission. Calvin Christian Church exists to encourage everyone to become more like Christ in our service to him. I think that's what was going on here. And by following the example Christ set for his disciples, we can grow to be more like him in service by taking the towel of service. We can be more like Christ by taking the towel of service even when it's not expected of us to take it. Making yourself a servant to others is contrary to the natural inclination, especially if you're raised in Western culture. Because in Western culture, you're taught to the badge of honor is to those who work the hardest, to climb the highest, and to earn the most. And that attaining significance is making a larger salary in your job or having more people working under you and serving you, not the other way around. But apparently the measurements of success are not limited to modern Western culture. Luke records in his gospel what happened in the upper room, probably just prior to Jesus taking the towel and washing the disciples' feet. He records that a dispute arose among them, that is, disciples, as to which one of them was considered the greatest. Isn't that ironic? They're arguing over who is to be the greatest, and Jesus then washes their feet. He became their servant. This act of Jesus, the Lord of the universe, proclaims, I think, a very clear message that taking the towel of service is what he desires from his disciples, and taking that towel when we're least expected to take it. Richard McDonald and his brother Maurice started a drive-in restaurant in San Bernardino, California in the late 1940s. It featured a 15-cent hamburger, 19-cent cheeseburgers, 20-cent milkshakes, and 10-cent fries. And it did pretty well. In fact, within a few years, business mogul Ray Kroc bought the proprietary rights to the name, and the McDonald's fast food industry was born. When Richard McDonald died in the summer of 1998 at the age of 89, it was revealed that the namesake for this most famous fast food chain restaurant in history frequently ate at the local McDonald's where he lived. He always ordered cheeseburger, a shake, and fries. And his grandchildren were just astonished of how he would not identify himself. He would not, take his place in the front of the line, and he would never let others know who he was. He always paid full price for his food. Jesus knew who he was too, that God had put all things under his feet, the scripture says, and that he had come from God and was returning to God, and yet he chose to humble himself and wash their feet. Instead of asking then, what am I expecting to do to be like Christ, we would see what needs to be done that has been left undone, and if we have the resources and the ability to do it, to take the towel of service and do it. Is there something you may have recently let pass by, maybe some opportunity to serve because you really didn't think it was expected of you? I mean, it's not my job, somebody else's job. Maybe that was a window of opportunity that could have led another person to be attracted to Christ because of your service. You'll never know. Could you have had an impact on countless other lives because by witnessing your willingness to be a servant, others follow that example and become a servant to others as well? You'll never know. Could you have passed an opportunity to serve Jesus himself because he said at another time, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me. Becoming more like Christ in service will mean taking the towel of service even when you're not expected to take it. Secondly, becoming more like Christ in service means taking the towel of service even when it hurts to serve. Now, what do I mean by that? Serving when it hurts to serve. Well, take a look at that mental picture. Now, first of all, don't take the mental picture of Da Vinci's Last Supper. They weren't all on one side of the table. In fact, someone jokingly said, okay, the cameraman got his camera ready and said, everybody get on the other side of the table. That's not how it was in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, they actually reclined on couches with a slight pillow raised at the very end and ate with their head on their hand and ate that way. So these 12 couches are all around this table, and their feet are sticking out over the end or toward the end, and Jesus is washing their feet. And who's there? Well, we know Peter's there. We've already seen that. Of course, it was James and John And there's Bartholomew, and Philip, and Andrew, and James the Less, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Thomas. And there's one more, Judas Iscariot. Jesus washed the very feet of the one who would leave that room and go and betray him, to be arrested and later crucified. When you follow the example of Jesus as servant, you may be called upon to serve in situations you would rather not. Because it's for people you would rather not serve. It may hurt deeply to have to serve someone who has hurt you in the past, or someone whom you know has taken advantage of others, and you just don't want to give them any more encouragement for that. It may hurt deeply to have to serve someone who has hurt you in the past. But still, it's to follow Jesus is to serve those who may have hurt you. And remember, we just read it. Jesus knew that Judas would leave him and betray him. He knew that, and yet he still washed his feet. John records that Jesus identified Judas as the betrayer. I remember as a child when I fell and got a cut or a scrape, I would go running to Mom. And she would go to the medicine cabinet and get that dreaded orange bottle with the little dropper inside. Some of you know what I talk about. A thiolate. She would take that little red dropper, put it in there, scrape that on my burn or my scrape, and it would burn, jumping up and down all around the room. It would burn that much. And you know what she would say? Now, son, when it's working, when it hurts, you know it's working. Anybody else heard that? Yeah. That's how it is when we're serving people we really don't care to serve. But when we take the towel of service and serve someone like that, it's like hearing the Savior say, when it hurts, you know my love is working through you. If we follow Jesus' example, take up the towel of service, even when it hurts, he will make us sufficient for the task, because of his own love for all. Perhaps there's an opportunity you've turned down because it hurt too much to think that you would have to serve that particular person. It might have been an opportunity that you could have experienced the love of Christ working through you. Might have been attracted even to the Lord who you serve because others saw you and saw you sacrificing yourself for the sake of others. You'll never know unless you are willing to take up that towel of service, even when it hurts. And finally, becoming more like Christ in service will mean taking the towel of service when you don't have to take it. Jesus had every right as their Lord and teacher to ask one of them to take the responsibility of washing the feet of every disciple. But he took the towel and he became a servant anyway. This country became the United States of America because 13 individual states sacrificed some of their states' rights for the sake of the Union. And it's reflected in the preamble to our Constitution, which incidentally we just celebrated recently, the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. What does the preamble say? You have to memorize this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It would seem today that that principle has made an 180-degree turn, thanks to our courts. Now the Constitution is interpreted mostly according to the rights of one individual at a time, or one group at a time. Not for the good of the Union, not for the good of the United States. Selfish pride is not willing to take the towel of servanthood. The story is told of a man who was obsessed with being number one. Never stopped talking about being first at his on sales in his office, first on the list for the next promotion. He enjoyed playing tennis and golf, but only if he won. You know that kind of person. Well, this man's long-suffering wife watched him with interest one day as he stepped on one of those, I don't see him very much anymore, but it used to be fortune-telling scales. Where you step up on the scale, and then the card would pop out and give you a nice saying about yourself and your weight. Well, he put in the coin, got the card. The card on one side said, "You are a born leader with superior intelligence, quick wit, and charming manner. Magnetic personality and attractive to the opposite sex. He pointed to the card and gave it to his wife and said, "Read this." So she read it. Then she turned it over and said, "And it has your weight wrong, too." What Jesus did in that upper room was not based on what he had a right to do, but what he did for the good of the disciples who would soon be the leaders of his church. He wanted them to have this indelible image in their minds of his willingness to take the towel and to become a servant to them when he didn't have to. Maybe there's been a time when you refused to take the towel of service because you really didn't have to do that in your position. F.B. Meyer suggests 2 reasons why we may refuse to take the towel of service. One is because we don't have the love of Christ working through us. And secondly, because we're not willing to stoop low enough. Peter must have learned that lesson because he later wrote in 1 Peter 5:6, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he might lift you up in due time." You might say, when you are willing to take the towel of service, you are stooping to a higher level. So let's freeze frame that snapshot of Jesus kneeling with a towel and a basin and washing the disciples' feet. Remember, he took the towel when he wasn't expected to take it. In fact, contrary to what the disciples may have expected of him. He took the towel even when it hurt, when he served even the one who would later leave him and betray him. And he took it when he didn't have to. He humbled himself. He stooped to a higher level. I think Jesus sets here the example for us of what it means to become a servant. And you know what? Unbelievers take notice of that. They take, especially in these days, when there are so many with needs around us. And when they see Christians or they see the church beginning to try to help meet those needs with compassion and with concern and with love, they notice that. And some even want to find out more about whom you represent and why you are doing what you're doing. Imagine what might happen in our neighborhoods and workplaces and schools if believers begin stooping to a lower level by daring to serve others. Maybe by providing child care for a frazzled single mother, offering to help a co-worker with a task that they're having problems with, or a classmate who's having a difficult time with their assignment, or visiting a friend's relative in the hospital, or shut in at home, or in a nursing home. Perhaps a neighbor needs a ride to the doctor's office, or someone who's been ill needs a meal, or an invitation to a meal at your home. Maybe you could serve a group of people with special needs by volunteering for the Pregnancy Resource Center in Shelbyville or the local food pantry. There are all kinds of possibilities. It's whether or not you see them as opportunities for service, like Christ. Offering genuine service out of our love for Christ that's already there can be the opening door to reach others' hearts for him as well. I want you to think of someone, or perhaps a group of people you might serve this week. Think about how you might serve that person or group. Even a small act of kindness will not go unnoticed. An 11-year-old girl named Summer Waters wrote this poem that I think sums up how people can follow Jesus in service. It's entitled, "I See Jesus." I saw Jesus last week. He was wearing blue jeans and an old shirt. He was up at the church building. He was alone and working hard. For just a minute, he looked a little like one of our members. But it was Jesus. I could tell by his smile. I saw Jesus last Sunday. He was teaching a Bible class. He didn't talk real loud or use long words, but you could tell he believed what he said. For just a minute, he looked like my Bible teacher. But it was Jesus. I could tell by his loving service. I saw Jesus yesterday. He was at the hospital visiting a friend who was sick. They prayed together quietly, and for just a minute, he looked like Brother Jones. But it was Jesus. I could tell by the tears in his eyes. I saw Jesus this morning. He was in my kitchen making my breakfast and fixing my special lunch. For just a minute, he looked like my mom. But it was Jesus. I could feel the love from his heart. I see Jesus everywhere, taking food to the sick, welcoming others to his home, being friendly to a newcomer. And for just a minute, I think he's someone I know. But it's always Jesus. I can tell by the way he serves. Go be Jesus to someone today. Someone's looking for you. Did you hear that? Go be Jesus to someone today. They're looking for someone like you. That's the challenge God sets before you as you grow to be more like Jesus Christ in service. To take that talent of service and symbolically wash someone else's feet through your service. It's time to sing our closing song and song of decision today. Message has been about service and the opportunities that might come your way today or this week to remember what he did for his disciples and follow his example and be a servant